Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Christy, Angie, and David B. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. And as an added benefit, you and everyone else who supports us on Patreon in the month of May will be entered into a raffle at the end of the month. 4 winners will be chosen, who will each have the chance to pick their favorite book as one of our August readings. That's right, it's your turn to choose your perfect sleepy book. It's the first time I've ever done a giveaway like this, and I can't wait to see what you pick. If you're interested in joining this raffle opportunity and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including several monthly episodes and extra long readings available only to subscribers, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. I hope you'll take a moment to check it out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's continue with a marvelous guide from the past, the Railway Traveler's Handy Book of hints, suggestions, and advice before the journey, on the journey, and after the journey. First published in 1862 by Lockwood & Co., Stationers' Hall Court, London. Let's pick up right where we left off with a new section, Be in Time. Let's begin. Be in time. This will not be an inappropriate place to impress upon the railway traveler the importance of punctuality. The old adage of time and tide wait for no man may be applied in this direction, only for the word tide, read trains. The time of departure stated in the table is no fiction. The strictest regularity is observed, and indeed must necessarily be, to prevent the terrible consequences that might otherwise ensue. Therefore, passengers, to ensure being booked, should be at the station 5 minutes earlier than the advertised time of departure. The doors of the booking office are usually closed at the time fixed for the departure of the train, after which no person can be admitted. It should here be observed that the clocks at the various railway stations are universally set and regulated by London time. For instance, most of our readers are aware that when it is 12 o'clock in the metropolis, it is either earlier or later than that hour elsewhere, according to the distance from London and the direction of the compass. Thus the clocks of a provincial town may point at 5 minutes to 12, whereas it has already struck 12 in London, and the train appointed for departure at that hour has started, when the unmindful traveler thinks that he still has a few minutes to spare. Bearing this fact in mind, it will be wise, upon alighting at a provincial station, to note the difference between the time registered there and the London time, so that the discrepancy may be duly allowed for in the traveler's subsequent movements. Beware of placing too great a reliance upon the domestic clock. these are generally eccentric in their movements, and by some sort of fatality, when most relied on, most mislead. The reason why persons are late for the train generally arises from an overweening confidence in there being plenty of time. The interval between starting for the station and arriving at it is too finely calculated, or too short a time is allowed for the performance of certain things. We hope that we shall not be accused of a want of gallantry when we declare that when there are ladies in the case, it is absolutely necessary to allow a wider margin for the preparations for departure than is ordinarily assigned. The fair sex must complete their toilet to their entire satisfaction, whatever the consequences may be. It should also be remembered that they do not enter into the spirit of the straight-laced punctuality observed by the railway authorities, and if the timetable sets down the departure at 1:20, they instinctively read 1:45. In such cases, it is absolutely necessary to adopt some stratagem to ensure being in time for the train. The precise modus operandi is left to the ingenuity of the traveler and the opportunities that may present themselves. Perhaps the following anecdote may furnish a hint on this head. A gentleman engaged in commerce had for a wife a lady possessed of every charm and nearly every virtue. There was one defect in her composition, however, which negatived many of her good qualities, and went far to disturb the domestic bliss which should have otherwise reigned, namely, an utter disregard of punctuality in the regulation of her domestic duties. Many were the cold looks, the harsh rebukes, the bitter rejoinders, and the sulky intervals which this one fault gave rise to. In due course of time, the father of the lady departed this life, and among other heirlooms that reverted to her was a clock which had literally served its time in the family. In the days of her early childhood, she who was now an unpunctual wife had been led to regard this clock as a monitor who was to be implicitly obeyed. Her going to and returning from school, her bedtime, her playtime, her mealtime, were duly regarded as they were duly recorded, and she would no more have thought of questioning the fidelity of this time's chronicler than she would the word of her parents themselves. Now when this clock once more made its appearance among the household gods, the old feeling of veneration and regard returned, and asserted its supremacy as strongly in the bosom of the matron as it had reigned in the breast of the child. Forthwith, every household duty was performed and regulated by this faithful indicator. The husband was not long in noting this newborn love of punctuality, nor slow in tracing the cause of it. He determined on profiting by it to the farthest extent to compensate himself for many terrible disappointments hitherto experienced, and to make provision for any future relapse. He accordingly hit upon the expedient of privately putting on the clock a quarter of an hour, and keeping it thus in advance, without his wife's knowledge in perpetuity. This he successfully accomplished, and although occasional droppers in sometimes ventured to hint that the clock was a little fast, and although every other timepiece far and near appeared by comparison to be slow, the good lady remained true to her orological faith, and to the latest day of her existence held the belief that of all the clocks in the universe, hers only was right, and every other wrong. It is needless to remark on the advantage which was not only reaped by the husband, but which accrued to the parties concerned by this harmless ruse. To resume the thread of our remarks, there certainly cannot be exhibited a more ludicrous sight than that presented by a man vainly endeavoring to catch the train. If he be burdened by many packages, and accompanied by a wife and a numerous family of young children, the picture is considerably heightened. Under any circumstance, it is galling enough to make that frantic rush, amidst the clattering of wheels, the barking of dogs, the jeers of bystanders, and the grim smiles of railway officials, and all this with no other result than to see the train you have made such desperate exertions to save quietly steaming out of the station, to say nothing of the irksomeness of being imprisoned, perhaps, at some out-of-the-way station for 2 or 3 hours, and the humiliation of being regarded and alluded to as the party that was too late for the last train. Even supposing that by a happy chance the train is just saved, the traveler is huddled into the first vacant seat without being allowed to exercise choice. He is very hot, flurried, and certainly not in the most amiable of moods. The probabilities are that he has lost or left something behind, or if he is not, he is under that impression, and is in a state of considerable agitation accordingly. Therefore we say, if you wish to start on a journey comfortably, or indeed if you desire to start at all, be in time. Traveling costume. The dress which a person wears when traveling by railway need not be an object of solicitude so far as fashion is concerned. The end to be achieved is comfort and ease. For gentlemen, the best costume is one of those suits, now so commonly worn, made of the same material, fashioned in such a manner as to leave the body and limbs free and unconstrained, and the color light, so as not to show the dust, nor require constant brushing. Moreover, liberally furnished with pockets for books, newspapers, sandwiches, pocket flask, etc. One of the most sensible articles of traveling attire is a shirt of flannel, which is much warmer than the linen or cotton shirt ordinarily worn, and does away with the necessity of frequent change of garment, which entails upon the traveler considerable expense and inconvenience. It will also be found a good plan in many cases to wear patent leather boots instead of the ordinary leather ones. They can be cleaned by the wearer himself with a little oil or milk, and are always at hand. A cap is preferable to a hat, but if the traveler be wedded to the chimney-pot style of head covering, he had better provide himself with a gibus or compressible hat, which admits of being easily stowed away when not in use. It would be as well for the traveler to provide himself with an overcoat, no matter what the season, the weight of the garment being regulated accordingly. In our variable climate, sunshine may at any moment be interrupted by rain, and even in the height of summer, keen blasts and cold winds sometimes make themselves felt. To meet these contingencies, the secret therefore is to have an overcoat which is not heavy, to carry either on the back or in the hand, serving its purpose when required, and not proving burdensome when no longer needed. Overcoats possessing these qualifications are made in great variety. It is of the utmost importance to keep the feet warm. This may be accomplished by a pair of lamb's wool socks and thick-soled boots, a pair of extra socks drawn over the ordinary ones, cork soles or strips of flannel placed within the boots. For effectually protecting the body against cold, there is nothing better than a maud or shepherd's plaid. For keeping away drafts from the legs, a railway rug or wrapper will answer the desired end. We shall perhaps be excused for calling attention to a new material for wearing apparel, which will possibly prove of service to the railway traveler. We allude to paper. There are now being advertised paper collars, paper shirt fronts, paper waistcoats, etc. The novelty is perhaps too startling to meet with general and immediate adoption, and besides, the material is generally regarded as too fragile to be depended on. A gentleman presenting himself at the dinner table with a white paper waistcoat washed into a pulp would cut a rather ignominious figure. A shirt front torn in the entire would somewhat awkwardly reveal the secrets of the bosom, and there would be something extremely undignified in dog-eared waistbands. In the matter of collars, however, there is not so much to object to. They will doubtless serve their purpose for the day, and inasmuch as their cost is not greater than the charge for washing linen ones, they will be found more convenient and equally as economical. The traveler thus provided with these, and with the flannel shirts previously referred to, may travel from place to place without being irritated by that somewhat uncertain and exacting class, the laundresses. As regards ladies' attire, we dare scarcely enter within that penetralia. We may, however, be excused for recommending the use of a veil for protecting the face and eyes, and a general regard for comfort and convenience rather than appearances. Supply of etceteras. It has been said that with a shilling, a piece of string, and a pocket knife, a man is prepared for any emergency. Without bounding our view within this narrow limit, we are of opinion that the possession of a few articles, comparatively trifling in themselves, is calculated to enhance the comfort and convenience of the railway traveler. Supposing the railway traveler to be provided, as we trust every railway traveler is, with a liberal supply of cash, there is even here a consideration as to its most available form. If the sum required be not very large, we strongly advise that it should be in hard cash, for this is readily transmittable. If notes must be necessarily taken, they should be of the smallest amount, as great difficulty and even expense is sometimes incurred in procuring change for larger notes. And even where the change can be given, it is in many cases withheld, because there exists a lurking suspicion that all is not right. Neither should a supply of small change be wanting. Half-crowns, shillings, sixpences, four-penny pieces, etc., ready for all calls and claims. When a traveler is unprovided with this comparatively trifling material, it is astonishing how liable he renders himself to overcharges and impositions, and frequently he has to pay 4 or 5 times the value of an article or for trifling services performed. Before starting on a journey, therefore, we would advise that change be sent for, and a portion of it, comprising every variety of coin, placed loose in the pocket for instant disbursement. Every person of ordinary thought and observation should carry with him a pocket memorandum book. Many incidents may occur well worthy of note. Many items of information may present themselves which should in no case pass by unrecorded. And here we would impress upon the reader not to be afraid or ashamed of using such a book, and not to trust too implicitly to memory to retain all that is seen and heard. If in an ordinary railway journey, say from London to York, a passenger were to jot down actual observations and passing impressions, he could not fail to be surprised and pleased hereafter with the fund of profit and pleasure he had thus stored up. No person should travel by railway without having his card of address about him. Setting aside the painful catastrophe of an accident, there are numerous emergencies when this simple voucher of respectability and personal identity is calculated to play an important part, and in the absence of which it is just possible for a person to be regarded with suspicion, treated with indignity, and for a time even deprived of his liberty. The most immaculate of railway travelers may bear an unfortunate resemblance to an accomplished swindler who once came by the same route, or be the very counterpart of some notorious offender wanted in the hue and cry. True, the possession of a card of address would not be in itself sufficient evidence of innocence and respectability, but this would go far to establish the truth, and taken in connection with corroborative testimony would probably clear up all doubts. Occasion frequently arises for dispatching a written communication at some point of the journey, or before the traveler is fairly established in his quarters. Under such circumstances, it is very difficult, and sometimes impossible, to procure writing materials, postage stamps, etc. As a provision against such emergencies, it is to be recommended that the traveler carry in his pocketbook 3 or 4 sheets of notepaper, folded within as many envelopes, and with postage stamps affixed. These, with a pocket pen and a small inkstand so constructed as not to allow the ink to escape, will place it in the possessor's power to write a note at any moment, and to dispatch it through the next post office arrived at. When it is borne in mind how frequently such emergencies as these arise, how important it is that they should be immediately attended to, how small the bulk of the articles mentioned, how easily procured, and how handy at all times and all places, we need offer no further apology for laying some stress on this matter. Conveyance to the station. The railway traveler will seldom experience any difficulty in meeting with a conveyance to take him to the station. Omnibuses, cabs, flies, etc. customarily journey stationwards, conformably with the departure and arrival of the various trains, while in the streets of London and other large cities, a vehicle is always within hail. If a person has little or no luggage, a seat in an omnibus will answer his purpose, but if his packages are numerous, then it will be necessary to have a cab or a fly. The squabbles between drivers and their fares upon alighting are matters of notoriety, and generally follow as a matter of course. But this is especially the case when a person is conveyed to a railway station, for the cabman well knows that 99 persons out of 100 prefer paying the excess of fare to missing the train, which they are likely to do by contending against the overcharge. The most satisfactory plan is to bargain with the driver before setting out, telling him exactly how many persons and packages there are, so that he may have no pretext for claiming extra fare. But if this be not done, it should be known that at most stations there is exhibited a table of fares, calculated from several points, and if this fail in affording the desired information, the policeman or head porter on duty will generally be able to throw a light on the matter. In any case, be prepared with the exact amount of the fare, for cabmen resemble in this particular Goldsmith's village preacher, who never had change nor wished to change. If you have but a short time to reach the station in, Be careful to choose a cab with a fresh-looking horse attached to it, and not one where the animal, either from deficiency of nutriment or excess of labor, is in such a drooping condition as to render him obviously unequal to the contemplated task. The hansom cabs are generally the most expeditious, but Clarence cabs are best adapted for quantities of luggage. If you determine upon walking to the station, allow yourself a few moments' grace beyond the bare time required. Observe also not to take any shortcuts unless you well know the road, for such attempts at abridging the distance frequently end in extending it, and sometimes result in losing the train. If you miss your way or are in doubt, press the first intelligent lad you meet with into your service, and for a few pence he will cheerfully conduct you to the wished-for goal. In cases where persons reside some miles from the station, and where the passengers and luggage are sufficient to fill 2 or 3 cabs or flys, it is a very good plan to charter an omnibus expressly for the journey. This will not prove any more expensive and infinitely more convenient. If your effects are very numerous and bulky, sufficient for instance to fill a van, the railway company, on being written to, will dispatch one of their vans to your address, and in this the goods will be packed by the company's servants and conveyed just as it is onto the rails of the line, where it will be either attached to the train you travel by or to some other train according to special arrangement. This will prevent much loading and unloading, expense, damage, loss, and confusion. In the course of his peregrinations, the railway traveler may find himself in some out-of-the-way place where no regular vehicle can be obtained to convey him to the station, and this contretemps is aggravated when the time of departure happens to be early in the morning. In such a dilemma, a mail cart, a market cart, or some other conveyance may come to the traveler's rescue, and this knowledge may be gathered at the village ale-house, the grocer's, the post office, etc. Captain B, a man of restless energy and adventurous spirit, emerged early one morning from a hovel in a distant village, where from stress of weather he had been compelled to pass the night. It was just dawn of day, and within an hour the train he wished to go by would start from the station, about 6 miles distant. He had with him a portmanteau, which it would be impossible for him to carry within the prescribed time, but which he could not very well leave behind. Pondering on what he should do, his eye lighted on a likely-looking horse grazing in a field hard by, while in the next field there was a line extended between 2 posts for the purpose of drying clothes on. The sight of these objects soon suggested the plan for him to adopt. In an instant he detached the line, and then taking a piece of bread from his pocket, coaxed the animal to approach him. Captain B was an adept in the management of horses, and as a rough rider perhaps had no equal. In a few seconds he had, by the aid of a portion of the line, arranged his portmanteau pannier-wise across the horse's back, and forming a bridle with the remaining portion of the line, he led his steed into the lane and sprang upon his back. The horse rather relished the trip than otherwise, and what with the unaccustomed burden and the consciousness that he was being steered by a knowing hand, he sped onwards at a terrific pace. While in mid-career, one of the mounted police espied the captain coming along the road at a distance. Recognizing the horse, but not knowing the rider, and noticing also the portmanteau and the uncouth equipment, This rural guardian of the peace at once came to the conclusion that this was a case of robbery and horse stealing. As the captain neared him, he endeavored to stop him, and stretched forth his hand to seize the improvised bridle, but the gallant equestrian laughed to scorn this impotent attempt, and shook him off and shot by him. Thus foiled, the policeman had nothing to do than to give chase, so turning his horse's head he followed in full cry. The clatter and shouts of pursuer and pursued brought forth the inhabitants of the cottages they passed, and many of these joined in the chase. Never since Turpin's ride to York or Johnny Gilpin's ride to Edmonton had there been such a commotion caused by an equestrian performance. To make a long story short, the captain reached the station in ample time. An explanation ensued, a handsome apology was tendered to the patrol, and a present equally handsome was forwarded, together with the abstracted property, to the joint owner of the horse and the clothesline. Arrival at the station. Supposing you to arrive at the station in a cab, you will there find a porter ready to remove the luggage onto his truck. Superintend this removal. See that you have all your packages. Give a glance inside the cab to ascertain that nothing is left behind, and as a further precaution, note the number of the driver in case anything should have escaped your notice. If you are accompanied by any persons, conduct them to the waiting room, there to remain until you come for them, after having settled the preliminaries of the journey. Although the railway company have now charge of your luggage, you are still expected to exercise supervision over it to prevent its being mislaid or missent. Therefore, after having conducted your traveling companions to the waiting room, you return to look after the luggage which is in the hall, or may have been, in the meantime, wheeled onto the station. When you recognize the truck upon which your effects are deposited, you call the attention of one of the porters to it, and he will wheel the things to the proper department, where a printed label of the name of the place you are destined for will be affixed upon each package. This process is an important one, and ought to be personally superintended by every owner of luggage. While this is being done, you may select the smaller articles or those you may wish to have with you in the carriage. The next duty is to see your luggage stowed away, making a memorandum of the number of the van in which or upon which the luggage is placed, while to facilitate your lighting upon the van at the end of the journey without hesitation, it would be as well to remark its relative position from the engine, and thus note it in your memorandum book: luggage in van number X, the Xth carriage from the engine. We have now to notice the quantity of luggage which each person is entitled to carry with him, free of charge. In this particular, there is a slight variation between the different lines. Those which run their trains to commercial and manufacturing districts are more liberal in their allowance than those lines which convey chiefly pleasure seekers. For instance, the Great Northern allows first class £112, second class £100, third class £56, while the Southeastern stipulates for first class £100, second class £60, third class £56. The average quantity of luggage allowed on the various railroads may be calculated to be between these two extreme rates. It will here be seen what an advantage the light leather traveling equipage of modern days possess over the heavy and lumbering trunks of a former age. The truth is that owing to the difficulties and expenses of traveling, our forefathers were more settled in their habits than we are. They contented themselves with a journey perhaps once in 7 years. We, on the contrary, deem it not excessive to take 7 journeys in 1 year. If a lynx-eyed railway porter suspects that a railway traveler has a larger amount of luggage than he ought to have, he settles his suspicions by an appeal to the weighing machine, and for every pound of luggage in excess, a charge is made at a certain rate. This excess the owner has the option of taking with him by the same train, or of sending by a goods train, which is cheaper than an ordinary passenger train. If, however, his luggage is comprised in one large package, he must perforce take it with him and submit to pay the higher rate. It is an excellent plan, where a person has a much greater extent of luggage than he knows he can take with him, to send the quantity in excess a day or two previously by a goods train, directing it to be left at the station till called for, or sending it to some friend or acquaintance to take charge of for a few days. On some lines, passengers by express trains are not permitted to carry the same weight of luggage as passengers by ordinary trains. On other lines, no such distinction is made, but this point should be clearly ascertained by the traveler beforehand. Travelers by ordinary excursion trains are not allowed to take with them luggage, properly so called, what they may take being restricted to such sized packages as can be conveniently stowed away in the carriage by which they travel. Choice of route. Many places may be reached by 3 or 4 routes, the competition among the various companies prompting them to annex such and such towns to their line at whatever cost or sacrifice. These bids for the patronage of railway travelers exercise an appreciable influence on the comfort and convenience offered and the rate of fares charged. The various routes also afford passengers an agreeable change and give them the opportunity of judging which is the most desirable line to travel by. When, therefore, a person is about to proceed to a certain place, he should ascertain whether it is accessible by more routes than one, and if it be so, he should compare the several fares charged, the relative distances, the time occupied in the journey, the number of stations stopped at, etc. Some regard is also to be had to the direct or indirect nature of the route, for although the fare in one case may be lower than the other, yet there may be involved change of carriage, halting at junctions, and other disagreeable hitches, which are more exacting than the mere disbursement of a few extra shillings. Excursionists who are not bound to any particular place, but to whom all points of the compass are alike, will do well to study attentively the excursion schemes put forth by the various companies, for by exercising this selection, a more pleasurable excursion at a much less cost may be devised than could be obtained by hasty adoption. Another consideration in the choice of lines is the proximity of the terminus to the town. In the one case, the station may be situated in the very center of the place. In the other, it may be some miles distant. The time lost and the extra expense in the latter case forming important considerations. Choice of train. On every railroad, there are trains running at certain rates and distinguished by some specialty. First in importance is the special train, and although this does not apply to the public generally, still it is as well to know that on great emergencies and in matters of life and death, a train may be dispatched to any point and placed entirely at the disposal of the person or persons demanding the convenience, they, of course, defraying the extraordinary charge, which is necessarily a heavy one. When a special train is required, the usual method is to apply to the station master, who will at once put the matter in hand. The express train takes second rank as a class of conveyance. The speed at which the train goes is very great, 30, 40, and sometimes 50 miles an hour being attained. Very few stations are called at, the object being to perform the journey as quickly and with as few interruptions as possible. The express has seldom a third class attached to it, and in some cases consists of first class only. There is usually some limit with regard to luggage, and the fare is higher than by ordinary train, ranging from an eighth to a fourth more. This train is well adapted for business persons or for those bent on any pressing errand. The times of departure are usually between 9 and 10 in the morning and between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. At the first blush, it would appear that a train traveling at the tremendous pace indicated is peculiarly liable to meet with accident, whereas the exact reverse is the case. The engine selected for the express train, the carriages the most secure, and the employees the most intelligent and trustworthy which the management can select. Then every precaution is taken to avoid collision with other trains, and the advent of the express is signaled from station to station along the whole route. Finally, the extraordinary momentum which is attained enables the train to dash through interposing obstacles without communicating scarcely any shock to the passengers, whereas an ordinary train under the same circumstances would experience a concussion, resulting in all probability in the loss of life and limb. But to many persons, the excessive vibration felt when traveling by express is most disagreeable, and when it is remembered how violently the body is thrown from side to side, and every now and then pitched in an opposite direction, and this incessantly for perhaps 3 or 4 hours, it is not to be wondered at that the delicate and ailing who have been subjected to such a process should feel shaky for some days afterwards. The mail train is preferred by many persons traveling on business, for inasmuch as it is employed in the postal service, its movements are necessarily regulated by the most scrupulous punctuality. The mere idea of traveling by the same train as the mail imparts a kind of confidence in the superior efficiency of the locomotive arrangements. The drawback with regard to the train is that it travels by night, generally departing at 9 o'clock in the evening and arriving at its destination in the small hours. The parliamentary train, so called because, according to Act of Parliament, every line is compelled to dispatch a train at least once daily, by which passengers shall travel at the rate of 1 penny per mile. It need scarcely be stated that as this is the cheapest, so it is the slowest mode of railway conveyance. Its maximum rate of speed is seldom greater than 20 miles an hour, and in some instances considerably less. It stops at all the stations. The time of departure is usually early in the morning, so that a person having a distance of more than 100 miles to go may calculate upon passing the best part of the day on the rail. Although the parliamentary train is obviously tedious to many persons, yet there are others for whom it has its advantages. The slow pace and the frequent stoppages adapt themselves to the exigencies of invalids and tend to quiet the apprehensions of the timid. Excursion trains, although a great boon to the humbler classes, and the economically inclined are not best calculated for the ordinary traveler. The confusion and bustle, the irregular times of departure and arrival, and the boisterous company into which one is thrown, although of very little moment to the person who has only a traveling bag and who sets out for a few days' jaunt, are ill calculated for the railway traveler who has a sober journey to perform and is burdened with its attendant responsibilities and cares. Railway privileges. Every inducement to travel, in the form of fares and accommodation, is held out by the various railway companies. First of all, we have the return ticket, enabling the traveler to accomplish the double journey at the rate of about a fare and a half. These tickets are in some cases limited to use on the day on which they are issued, while in other instances an interval of 2 or 3 days is allowed. The season ticket or annual ticket, payable monthly or quarterly, acts as a great encouragement for persons to become permanent residents in country places accessible by rail. The rate at which this privilege can be secured is probably 1/2 or 1/3 less than would be paid in the ordinary way. It permits the person to travel as often as he pleases by any train, and to or from any part of the line. It also obviates the inconvenience and delay occasionally experienced in procuring the ticket, the holder of the season ticket having nothing more to do than to make straight for the carriage. We may here remind season ticket holders to renew their privilege when the current term has expired. The omitting to do this, either by accident or design, and still traveling on the line, has before now led to awkward exposures and unpleasant consequences. Through tickets are issued to enable travelers to take a certain route from one point to another and to stop at various intermediate places. Before such ticket is taken, the intending railway traveler should make sure that he will be entitled to stop at those places he desires to visit, and he should also explicitly understand what interval of time is allowed him at each halting place. Excursion tickets are of varied kind and character. The leading idea is, however, to afford an opportunity of enjoying the greatest amount of pleasure at the smallest possible cost. Sometimes there are certain restrictions which excursionists are expected to pay attention to and abide by, as, for instance, a limit in the quantity of luggage, not being allowed to stop at intermediate stations, being obliged to travel by certain trains and none others, etc. Railway insurance. There is a certain amount of hazard in railway traveling, and although the number of accidents are few when taken in connection with the immense amount of traffic, nevertheless, there are such unfortunate occurrences, and they may visit any person at any period. One person may take long journeys day after day and year after year, and escape for a time on the principle that the pitcher that goes often to the well is broken at last. Another person may perhaps venture on a railway for the first time in his life and meet with an untimely end. One of the characteristics of railway accidents is that the injuries sustained are for the most part severe, and when not fatal, frequently incapacitating the sufferer from pursuing any active business during the remainder of his lifetime. Sometimes the accident is of so peculiar a nature that although there is no external appearance of injury, yet the shock given to the system has been so violent as to interrupt the functions of the brain, disturb the equilibrium of the mind, and even to suspend vitality itself. To meet such catastrophes as these, there exists a Railway Passengers Assurance Company, which undertakes to pay compensation in cases of accident or death upon the following principles. Insurances may be effected for a single or a double journey, for periods of time from 1 to 12 months, for terms of 5 or 10 years, for the whole term of life. The system of insuring for each journey is conducted at nearly all railway stations by the traveler taking an insurance ticket of the booking clerk at the time of taking the railway journey ticket. The addition to the railway fare is very trifling, namely 1 penny for the third class, 2 pence for the second class, and 3 pence for the first class, whatever may be the length of the journey. The sums insured for these payments are £1,000 to a first-class passenger, £500 to a second-class passenger, and £200 to a third-class passenger. These amounts are paid in case of death, and proportionate compensation allowed in cases of personal injury. The same amounts can be insured for a double or return journey and for excursion trains at corresponding rates of premiums. Insurances for periods of time may also be effected at the various railway stations, securing compensation for death or accident occurring on any railway in the United Kingdom or on the continent of Europe, namely to insure £1,000, a premium of £5 for 1 month, £10 for 3 months, £16 for 6 months, £20 for 12 months. Annual insurance may be effected by the payment of a small premium yearly, and insurance for a term of years by a single payment at a proportionally low rate. The easy and ready manner in which these insurances may be effected leaves no excuse for the railway traveler neglecting to take so wise a precaution. All that has to be done is to place the insurance fee along with the railway fare on the pay counter, and to receive the insurance ticket with the railway ticket. Against this mode of insurance, as against others, some weak-minded persons are prejudiced, because they fear that the very catastrophe against which they are providing will be all the more likely to occur. An illogical and unfounded mode of reasoning, unworthy alike of argument or refutation. One important feature of railway insurance is that compensation paid by the insurance company does not invalidate any claim that may be made on the railway company, and in the event of an action being brought, the payment of such compensation cannot be pleaded in mitigation of damages. Supposing the railway traveler to have insured for the journey he is about to take, the next consideration is the disposal of the insurance ticket. It is not safe for him to retain it about his person, because in the event of an accident, the ticket may be destroyed or may fall out of the pocket and be lost, thus precluding either the sufferer or his survivors reaping the contemplated benefit. The best plan is therefore for the railway traveler to take with him an envelope stamped and addressed to his wife or nearest and dearest friend, to insert the ticket in this envelope and to post it either at the station or at an office in the immediate locality, or if he be accompanied by a friend, he may hand the ticket over to him without any further trouble. But if these little matters are objected to as distracting the attention and harassing the mind of the traveler at the important moment of starting, then let him insure by the year or for a term, thus becoming a policy holder, as in the case of ordinary life insurance. And with that fine practical advice, I think we'll end this evening's reading from the Railway Traveler's Handy Book, which certainly is chock full of information, as well as more than a few curious assumptions, which I hope you'll forgive. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, I'll leave a link to a copy at the Internet Archive in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, as many of you did with this book, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.